Hi, I'm Lisa Rubel from Love to Color My World, and today I'm here for the fourth project in my Pillow Talk series where we're going to make a rainbow petal pillow. So for this project I wanted to use a full rainbow of fabrics. So I chose some Benertex fabric, the Cotton Shot collection from Amanda Murphy, and I've got a full rainbow of 10-inch squares to play with. The pack actually comes with 42 different 10-inch squares, and I selected the ones that I wanted to use here. So I've got about 21 10-inch squares, and then some gray backing fabric, a zipper, and then a 12-inch by 16-inch pillow form. So let's get started on our project. So for this project, we're going to use a half circle template to make a bunch of little fabric petals. And I'm going to start out by making 2 of each color that I've chosen, and then kind of see how all the colors play together as I start assembling my pillow. So I cut my first 10-inch square in half because I'm only going to use half for now, and then I can save that other half for another project down the road. And what I'm going to do, I pressed it in half as well. So I've got right sides together, and I can fit this on it twice, my half circle. And actually what I like to do is if I line it up along the raw edges of the fabric, then I only have to cut the curve. I don't have to cut the straight edge as well. So I'm gonna trace it on that side and then come over to this side as well and trace it. Now you can find the template in the link below the video, and I said it's a half circle, and it is, but it's got a little extra at the top to account for the seam allowance. So it's a half circle plus a 1/4 inch along the flat edge. So now I've got my fabric folded in half right sides together, and I've got 2 circle shapes traced on here. And what I'm going to do is take my scissors. Actually, I think I'm going to put a pin in each of these just to hold the 2 layers together. And then I'm going to take my scissors and cut out on that drawn line for each of those. And do the same for the second. Now, if you wanted to, you could absolutely sew first and cut second. If you prefer to do that, it's up to you. Okay, so now I'm going to go over to the machine, and I'm going to sew just along the curved edge with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And you may want to backstitch at the beginning and the end because we'll be turning this right side out, and so that will help to hold those seams. But just a 1/4 inch right along the edge. If it's not perfect, don't worry about it. And then we'll flip them right side out. So I've got my 2 half circles stitched, and if you trace on a bunch of your colored squares all at once, you can chain piece and just get a bunch of them done at once. Then what I'm going to do is turn it right sides out and use a turning tool to just sort of push that curve out all the way so it's got a nice shape. And then take it over to my iron and press it. That will flatten it nicely. And then you can look again after you do that to see if you've got a nice curved edge, or if you have any kind of straighter or square parts that you need to press out. Push out and then press out. So I'm going to press this again. And what you can even do if you want is to spray it and then press it, and that will help it lay flat. So there's my first little stitched petal. I'm going to do the same thing with the second one. Turn it right side out. Use my turning tool run it along that seam line to create a nice curve. And then press it. And see, I've got a little pointy spot over here, so I'm just going to work on that seam a tiny bit more, because the smoother your curves are, the better your finished pillow will look. Okay, I've got 2 petals done. Now it's time to make a whole rainbow's worth of petals. And it's good to have a couple extra because to lay it out in sort of a gradated, pink to red to orange to yellow to green to blue to purple, you might want an extra one or one less of another. So if you've got plenty to play with, you can work on your layout. So get all your petals made and then we'll work on assembling our pillow top. So I wanted to show you the other way that I talked about how you could stitch these. I traced my 2 half circle templates. I put my pins in to hold the fabric. And now I'm going to go to the machine and using the line as a guide, stitch a 1/4 inch inside the line before I cut it. So I've stitched on both and now I can take the pins out and then go back and cut on that line just like we did before. And the advantage of doing it this way is you don't have to worry quite so much about the fabric shifting. You've got a larger piece to hold on to as you manipulate that curve under the foot of your sewing machine. But either way works, you get the same results with both methods. So I've got all of my petals created and I ended up using 45 in my design. So I have 2 from each color that I chose plus 1 additional one to make my 45. And if you look, I've got mine all laid out. I went with a gradation rainbow effect starting in the upper left corner with the pinks and then going down to the lower right corner with the purple. If you're going to use a 12 inch by 16 inch pillow like I have, you want to do rows of 5 alternating with rows of 4. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows of 5. And then I've got 5 rows of 4. And so I've got them all laid out in the color order that I want. And the next thing that we're going to do is to sew the petals in each row to a strip. And I've got gray right here. I'm starting out by cutting these at 17 inches, which are a little long, but I'd rather be able to trim than come up short once we add all this bulk on. And what you want to do with your strips is to press them in half so you can find the center, because that will help us in aligning our petals on each strip. So we're going to sew the petals to the top edge of each strip, and we're going to use a 1/8 inch seam so that it will be covered up when we piece the different strips together. So in the top row, I've got 5 petals. So I'm going to take my center petal and I'm going to center the raw edges on the top of that strip, matching the center of my petal with that pressed center point. I'm just going to put in 1 pin at either end and then work my way out on both sides. You want the petals to butt up against each other, not overlap, but just butt up. And I tried it with 1 pin and it just makes the petals move a bit as you stitch, so I recommend doing the pins at both ends like I am. I'm going to add this whole first row. And I chose this neutral dark gray for the back, or the background, because it will show through a little bit between the petals, and I just wanted it to be something that would kind of fade into the background. And add my last petal, so my curved edges are touching. Okay, so there's the first row. So I'm going to stitch down that strip to secure all these petals in place with an 1/8 inch seam allowance, so that when we actually stitch them together, that basting line will be covered. So right now we're just stitching to baste these petals into place. So here's my first row, and as you stitch, even though you have the pin at each end, you want to hold as it's coming under your sewing machine foot. You want to kind of hold this front edge of a petal down, because it has a tendency to want to fold back on itself. So between the pin and your finger, just make sure you hold it so that it guides, the foot guides itself over the petals. So there's row 1. So for a 4-petal row, which is what we have next, we're going to position our center 2 petals butting up against that pressed center line. So you can see there's my line, so I'm going to put that one there, matching those raw edges along the top, and then do the same with this one. And the reason we want to line up with that pressed center is because that way when we go to join these strips together, we can just line them up from end to end and know that all of our pieces will be in the right spot. So I'm going to add another one over here. And then one over here. If you can work close to your sewing machine on a surface like I am, that way it's easy to go back and forth so you don't lose track of the order of your colors of your petals. The other thing you can do is take a photo of your petals as they're laid out, and then you can refer back to that to make sure you've got them all in the order. So we're going to do the same thing with this one, stitch with that 1/8 inch seam allowance just to base those petals in place. And then I'm going to keep doing that for each row. The row of 5 petals, then of 4, 5, 4, 5, 4, 5, until I have all of my petals stitched to a gray background strip. So once you've got all of the petals joined to gray strips, we're going to start sewing our strips together to make the pillow front. So what you want to do is to take the top strip and fold the petals out of the way, and this is where our pressed center line on the gray strip comes in handy. So you're going to line those two up and pin what's the bottom edge of the top strip to the top edge of your second strip. So I'm going to put one pin in the center, and then I'm going to put one pin at each end so that I know it's lined up correctly, and then go back in and add a couple additional ones. You want to make sure that that top row of petals is folded out of the way so you don't accidentally stitch them. And then when you do stitch here, you want to go 1/4 inch seam allowance, or maybe even a little more, so that you know that your basting stitch is covered up. So here are my first 2 strips stitched together, and now it's time to press. And this might be the trickiest part of the whole project. Not to say that it's hard, but you've got to just pay attention and pull a little bit. So what you want to do is pull back the petals in that top strip and hold it a little bit taut so that you know that you are able to get this top gray strip nice and flat with the second gray strip. You don't have any extra creases. So you want to hold those petals back while you go all the way along. It doesn't hurt to even do it more than once to get those 2 gray pieces laying flat. And then, of course, it will ultimately flip back over like that. So I'm going to continue joining my rows in pairs, and then after I have all the pairs made, I will start joining the pairs together until I have all of my petal strips joined into a rectangle. So how cool is that? I really love how this turned out. The last thing we need to do to finish the pillow top is to add a gray strip to the top and to the bottom. So I have cut 2-inch wide strips, and same thing, I creased the center point so I could find that. And we're going to continue matching up the center point from our gray strips so that we get this right in the correct spot. And then pin at both ends. And this top piece just provides a finished edge to our top row of petals so that they're not sticking up at a funny angle. And then for the bottom piece, we need to hold those petals back while we pin this in place, because you want to make sure you're not stitching on the petals. And this bottom piece just provides a spot for that bottom row of petals to land and flop over. Okay, I'm going to stitch both of these on, and then we'll work on assembling our pillow. So here is my finished pillow top with the strips at the top and the bottom. Now, because we sewed so many skinny strips together, you're going to want to measure your piece, because when you do that, sometimes everything doesn't come out super straight. So you're going to want to measure yours to see how tall it is. You want it to be 13 inches tall. And then when we do the seam allowance, that'll be 12.5, which will have a little give in the pillow. And so if yours is taller than that, you can trim a little bit off of the top and or the bottom. And then we want it to be 17 inches wide. And you may need to square up the ends a little bit so that they run straight. Again, with sewing all these skinny strips together, sometimes you get a little bit of waviness in there, but that's okay. Once it's on the pillow, it will be fine. So after you have your top squared up and should be measuring 13 by 17, we're going to need to cut a piece of backing fabric that is also 13 by 17. I'm going to flip this around. We're going to put the zipper at the bottom. So what I'm going to do is align this bottom edge and pin it in place. And then we're going to stitch a big basting stitch along the bottom, and that'll be where we're going to position our zipper. So you want to stitch that basting stitch with as long of a stitch as you can, so it's easy to pick out, and about a 1/2 inch in from that bottom edge. So stitch all along there, and then we will place our zipper. So after you stitch your basting stitch, first thing, go back to your machine and change the stitch length back to your normal length, because I can't tell you how many times I've done this where I've done my basting stitch and then I go to stitch my zipper on and I've got this big long stitch. So get your machine set back up again, and then you're going to want to press your seam allowance open from that basted stitch between your backing and your top. And then you take your zipper. I've got a 12-inch gray one that will blend in, and I'm going to center the actual zipper over that seam, and then also center the zipper from left to right on my pillow, and then pin it in place. And try to keep the actual zipper as close to that seam as you can. I try to position my pins so that I can pull them out as I'm stitching instead of having them be this way or even sideways. I position them on a diagonal this way so that they're easy to slide out. So now I'm going to stitch my zipper in place using a zipper foot. Make sure that your zipper is face down so that it's facing the what will be the front of your pillow, because then when we open that basting stitch, you'll have the zipper handle right there. So zipper sewn in, just a couple more steps. What you need to do first is find your seam ripper and pick out those basting stitches that are hiding your zipper. Just be careful that you don't rip through the fabric. So I kind of sped through the zipper installation here, and if you are not familiar with how to install zippers, you can do some Googling. There are plenty of tutorials out there, both video and otherwise, that will walk you through each step. So I talked about it pretty quickly because my main focus was on creating the front of the pillow, but there's more information out there if you need it. So the very last step after your zipper is attached is to sew the other sides of the pillow front and back together. So I like to start up at the opposite corners from my zipper and get those positioned, and then work my way across the top And hopefully they are exactly the same size, but if one is a little different, you may just have to ease it to fit as you stitch around these three sides. So I've got those, and then I'm going to work my way down to the zipper. And the reason we have the petals not extending all the way to the edge of our pillow front is then we don't have to worry about catching them when we stitch this seam. They won't be in the way. Okay, and then same thing on the other side. And again, I like to work my way down from the edge opposite the zipper, because then I can sort of arrange the fabric as I need to so it all fits well. So once you have that all pinned, you're just going to stitch all the way around those three sides of your pillow using a generous 1/4 inch seam allowance, and make sure that your zipper is open so that you can turn this right side out after you finish. So one more thing to add about when you're sewing those other three sides of your pillow, make sure you do it so that your side with all of your seams is on top, because that way you can make sure that the seams all lay flat in the right direction. So now I've got mine all stitched together. I'm going to turn it inside, right side out for the big reveal. I'm going to use my corner poker to get those corners nice and sharp. I like to run it along the seam line as well. I just feel like it helps to flatten out that seam, sort of like we did with the petals. In the same way, get this corner and then down this side, last corner. Fantastic. And now to stuff my pillow insert inside and see how it looks. Ta-da! So cool. Love all those dimensional petals in the rainbow colors. Very fun. So I hope you enjoyed this 4th pillow in the Pillow Talk series, our rainbow petal pillow. And I want to say thank you to Text for providing the fabric not only for this pillow, but for all 4 of the pillows that I created in Pillow Talk. And if you missed the other 3, make sure you check them out on YouTube. And you can also head over to my blog for some more information about some of the cutting measurements that go into this pillow, because I know sometimes it's hard to catch all of those in a YouTube video. So thanks so much for stopping by. You can find the link below in the comments to get to my blog, and I can't wait to see any rainbow petal pillows that you make.